Now, Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham, in responding to these twin tragedies in El Paso by a white supremacist, in Dayton by a deranged leftist, and it's important to point that out because it's all been El Paso all the time, white supremacy all the time. The guy that perpetrated the attack in Dayton was a crazed leftist and a big fan of Elizabeth Warren, but you don't hear people saying much about that. But in response to this tragedy, Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham over in the Senate are, in your words, caving to gun grabbers. How?
Well, they've expressed open support now for red flag laws, the legislation that we haven't actually seen the legislation, Tim. I wrote a piece on this for LibertyNation.com this week. There was an announcement about legislation that's going to be offered. So that's what we have to go on. That Graham says that he's moving forward with it, with Trump support, that will basically give money to states for helping them enact these red flag laws. What the laws essentially do is they remove due process rights from Americans when it comes to retaining their Second Amendment rights. It's as simple as that. Right now, all the rights that you and I have as free persons who aren't convicted of any crime, in order for the state to take away those rights, they have to use a due process to do so, or we're represented by counsel, we have a chance to fight for them, criminal proceeding or a civil commitment proceeding. That's not what happens with these red flag laws. They remove the due process. So I could, for instance, go to court and say, Tim Donner's a crazy man, and he has issued all kinds of threats, and he needs to have his guns taken away. And in a typical state, these are state laws, and they do differ from state to state. But in a typical state's red flag laws, if I made a compelling case to a judge without even notifying you before the hearing, they could say, yes, we're going to do this. You're now relieved of your firearms by right. You can't touch or buy one.
I think that the thing that is most frightening about this is the way that it could be abused for political purposes. Yeah, it will be. All right, let's just say it. It will be used as a cudgel against political enemies. And I think that's the problem.
And familial ones. And from my perspective as an attorney, Tim, it's in the family law courts where we're going to see most of these, where women, and because mostly between men and women, men are firearms enthusiasts more than women are, women will use this as a weapon against men in custody and support proceedings. And that, I'm sure there will be some actual genuine uses of this law, and to the extent that that stops a mass shooting, that's good. But it's not okay to do so at the expense of our precious rights.
I think it's a shame that we've come to a point in the process where we have to, where we can say, as we just did, that there's a certainty that a law like this intended for good is going to be abused. And that's a problem with all government programs. If only the people that qualify for aid to families with dependent children and other welfare programs, only the people that really needed them, the people that really couldn't help themselves, were using it. Right. If it was only them, we wouldn't object to the program.
It's the opposite that's true, which is that, we have later on down in our list, if we get a chance to get to it, the story about the FBI Officers Association basically arguing for the passage of a new domestic terrorism bill. Well, we had a new domestic federal criminal bill passed after September 11th, and over 80% of the warrants that are issued under those special warrants that we needed for terrorism are for drugs. We know already. In other words, it's not that down the line the abuse is going to happen, or maybe there'll be waste, fraud, and abuse. The majority of it's going to be waste, fraud, and abuse. And the majority of these red flag laws, I think it's fair to say, will not be used to stop any kind of mass shooter, but instead frustrate the rights of ordinary Americans.
Who gets to really define what a domestic terrorist is? Who creates that definition?
It's just quite silly. It's a power grab. In the face of crisis, it's a great time to grab power. If you will benefit from gaining power, now is a great time to grasp for it, because people are more willing to give away their liberty in the threat of this uncertainty than they normally would be.